it's now almost 1 p.m. Supposedly at 1 p.m. today, a judge is going to rule on whether Mahmud Khalil, who Columbia student, who was I think like the communications person for the folks who were protesting, pro-Palestine protesters who were protesting at Columbia, and or anti-genocide. I mean, now they dovetail. And he was picked up by ICE officials. We know this from a video that his 8-month-old pregnant wife.
Now 9. I mean, he's been in jail he's been detained for a month. I don't know if she's given birth yet.
He was basically disappeared. Didn't know where he was for a couple of days. Ended up in a facility in Louisiana, if I remember correctly. The U.S. government was given until 2 days ago, Wednesday night, to provide evidence that he had done something. Remember, he's here legally. He's got I think a student visa at the very least, maybe a green card. I'm not even sure. Green card. And here legally, and some evidence of a crime that would justify his revocation of his freedom. Apparently, the U.S. government could not come up with one. So Marco Rubio just wrote a letter saying his belief system is hurting foreign policy.
Yes.
I'm not being facetious. When I say that, that's what the substance of the, the letter to me looked like it was being written for a third party. Like it wasn't to impress the judge. It was to impress Trump supporters, to make it look like we're doing this and to scare maybe other people too. So we'll find out in an hour. But we also now have the Supreme Court last night said, the U.S. government, you admitted that you sent a wrong person to this gulag. It turns out that 90% of them, now it's reporters have reported on 90% of the people we sent to this El Salvadoran gulag, ostensibly because they were gang members or whatnot, 90% of them had no criminal record. And we don't even know if there's any, I don't know how you prove if someone's in a gang or not, but, tattoos, obviously. The presence of tattoos. Or also young people. Hoop nose rings. Right. I don't know if people, but you wrote a piece about the McCarthyism that is, that is growing. And we've watched university after university basically be threatened with getting grants revoked, unless they make some deal. We've watched these big law firms capitulate. And the Trump administration's response, we want a consent decree to make sure that Colombia is actually going to basically police anti-Semitism. And I put that in quotes because it's absolute garbage what they're talking about.
Yeah, no, it's pretty terrifying stuff. I mean, as you said, my piece, I sure try to frame this as, part of a longer history in America of these kind of like crackdowns on, so-called subversive or, like anti-American speech. There's a Red Scare like during World War I and a Red Scare in the late 40s, early 50s. And now, with pro-Palestinian speech, the common pattern is, which I wanted to emphasize, they all start with kind of like liberal administrations. It was like Woodrow Wilson, Harry Truman, and Joe Biden that like kind of initially started this idea that, there are these people who have bad thoughts, are foreigners, are like, un-American, and they build the infrastructure, of legal persecution. And this, especially with the sort of McCarthyism and now, gets taken over by the right. It actually gives an opening to the right because, you're playing into already right-wing fears of, the alien, the foreigner. So, liberals, when they talk about McCarthyism, they talk about this is like a Republican thing, right? Like, Joseph McCarthy, this bad Republican senator, right? But it's actually like Harry Truman that, built all the sort of loyalty tests, the purge of the civil service, all the sort of Red Scare rhetoric, which allowed, like McCarthy to come in. And the only difference was Truman was like, really aiming at like, real reds. And then McCarthy said, well, we can apply it more broadly, right? Like, because, it's liberals are also communists. And so this is a way in which the sort of centrist Democrats, liberal Democrats even, they consider themselves, like, Wilson, Truman, and Biden, basically, they are giving a license to the far right, and they are actually empowering the far right. And I think that that's the pattern that people have to realize. And also another pattern is that liberal institutions, are not able to defend liberal values. Like, when we think about liberalism, like philosophy, like, I think it's something we all kind of like can believe in, right? Like, representation, democracy, free speech. But these big liberal institutions, the big law firms, the universities, during McCarthyism, the same thing. They voluntarily purged themselves before McCarthy came along. And now like Columbia was already, because of donor pressure, was doing it. And one is basically seeing is a kind of, I mean, I think a lot of it is, frankly, the Israel lobby, which is very enmeshed with the national security state, trying to push back public opinion in a period where public opinions actually change, where, there's a poll from the Pew, 53% of Americans now have a negative view of Israel. And that includes 50% of like Republicans, like under age 49. The only group that is a strong majority, strongly pro-Israel now are old Republicans, basically boomer Republicans, right? If you look at like Democrats, young Democrats are hugely anti-Israel or critical of Israel, 70-80%. But even like older Democrats are like 60%, right? They're lagging, but they're catching up. So basically, they're trying to use the repressive power of the state and of like finance in these institutions to push back the tide of public opinion in a period where public opinion is like radically shifting. And maybe that's a difference from McCarthyism, because I actually think McCarthy was able to appeal to a widely shared anti-communism.
What happened to popularism, though? By the way, I've been told that the Democrats should embrace popular opinion in policy, except on Israel.
I actually once had an argument with David Shore on Twitter about this, because I mentioned, like, if you look at the polling, like, maybe they should pull back on Israel. And he he said something like, well, there are other considerations on this issue. And then he deleted that tweet. And so
I hope you took a screen grab of that.
Yeah, I did it. I kind of like kicked myself for that.
Somebody can find it.
I gotta find that. Yeah.
But let me ask you this. I mean, because I think there's two things here. One is in this specific era, there is no doubt that the crackdowns by the Biden administration and sort of like liberal society, as it were, on these protests. I think also this sort of like we can see this, the anti-Semitism, the charge of anti-Semitism is justifying a whole host of things way outside of I mean, in addition to the charge of anti-Semitism being problematic, but this is
no. I mean, they're defining anti-Semitism as any criticism of Israel, which is itself
right. And I'm saying that in itself is also, but outside of the realm of anti-Semitism, it's empowering this administration to do things like, deport immigrants and to jail immigrants that, because once you say it's a belief that harms foreign policy and it's justified through, well, it's anti-Semitic and we support Israel and blah, blah, blah. But once you then generalize it to it's a belief that undermines U.S. foreign policy, well, then it's off to the races. Like this is in that process. Just go a little bit deeper for me in this process, because this notion of once you open the door in a liberal administration to this, what is being done? Like, because there's a lot of times where people are saying, we should be nuanced about this. And, but your argument is if you're not maximalist in some of these things, then you're opening the door and leaving essentially like, I don't know what the metaphor is here, but you are open. Well, you've opened the door a little bit, and then it's a lot easier just to push it wide or open, I guess.
Yeah.
How does that work? Well, how does that work?
Well, I mean, the way it works is that the fundamental premise is already kind of reactionary. The fundamental premise is that, which the Biden shared. I mean, when Biden was saying like these students are like violent and anti-Semitic, I mean, just on the factual issue, like Spencer Ackerman has done some good reporting on this. Like almost all the violence on student campus came from like pro-Israel people. There might have been a few small incidences otherwise, but like it was really, but beyond that, and on the anti-Semitism thing, I mean, like I really have to say, like we have this group called Stop Anti-Semitism that says, who's that children's entertainer?
Miss Rachel. I mean, this is the most. We have so much to cover, but this has been one of the most insane stories. Miss Rachel is like one of the most popular children's creators on the internet for young children doing instructional videos. She's beloved by all parents. It helps them out. She has been she's been making videos for the kids in Gaza, and you see them being shown it as they're surrounded by rubble. Dirty, right? Like they have such little to look forward to. And the Stop Anti-Semitism people are accusing her of being a Hamas supporter and anti-Semite. It's
No, I mean, it's
insane.
Saying like Big Bird and Elmo are pro-Hamas. I mean, like this is like the level we're getting at. No. But I think this basic thing where Biden kind of opened the door. He basically made incredibly incendiary comments. One could also say all the kind of like lies he said about beheaded babies and whatnot. Like basically that was like red meat for the right, because they could only say like someone like Trump basically says, there are these horrible like anti-Semites and threats, and you're weak. So he basically goes, Biden says he's going to defend you from these horrible evil hordes, but he can't defend you. I'm actually the tough guy, the strong guy, the guy that'll deport you and will defend you. There's the same with Joseph McCarthy. I mean, McCarthy basically said, well, Harry Truman is saying there's a big communist threat, but he's not doing anything. They're still communists. Whereas, I'm actually going to name all the communists, and I'm going to deport all the communists. Now, so you're already buying into the scaremongering logic that terrifies people. And I have to say, even beyond this, and I think the best person that expresses was Jewish member of the State Department who resigned from the Biden administration, where when she resigned, she said that, I will never forgive the Biden,
Lily Greenberg call?
Yeah, Lily, yeah, exactly. She said, I will never forgive the Biden administration for making Jews the face of the American war machine. Yep. And this is exactly what's happening, because this is what people need to understand. And this is why I don't really like there's an Israel lobby, but it's really something much bigger than this. It is the American war machine, the American imperial machine wants a revenge and domination in the Middle East. And they are using Jews as human shields to justify this. And I find that morally unconscionable. And I have to say, if you want to make more anti-Semitism in the world, that's what you do, right? Because this will absolutely make people associate Jews unfairly with these horrific crimes. And the other aspect of this, one of these groups, I don't know if it's Stop Anti-Semitism or something very similar. They did this, showing this picture of these forged protests at Columbia, saying, these are people who need to be blacklisted, and they were all Jewish students.
Yeah,
basically, you're using fighting anti-Semitism to basically suppress the Jewish left. I don't know. I mean, I just think it's a very sordid thing, but it's something that very cynically Biden and I have to say Chuck Schumer, they started it, and they handed over weapons to Trump. And one sees the same process frankly in Israel, where a lot of the things that we really are against in Israel, like the settlements, they were all started by the labor governments. The labor government created a repressive apparatus, and then someone like Netanyahu could come and say, well, but they're not doing it effectively. If you want to really effectively, build settlements and repress the Palestinians, you need a strong man, and I'm the guy. So, in a lot of ways, I think the liberals have empowered both Trump and Netanyahu.
This dynamic, and in moving off of that particular example of it, I mean, just to wrap things up, because I did want to talk to you just slightly about abundance, because we never got an opportunity to really discuss that much. But this dynamic of when you accept a premise and attempt to nuance it in certain instances by accepting the premise, then all of a sudden you've moved in outside of, let's say, a policy thing, and you've moved into a political, to the realm of politics. Like I've told this story many times before, but I first met Alex Lawson of Social Security Works years and years ago at Netroots Nation, and when George Bush was trying to privatize Social Security, I think there was a bunch of people who were saying, like, our slogan is, something like, and this is probably not exactly what it was, but fix it, not privatize it. And I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah.
When you say that it's broken, which it's not, Social Security was not broken. I mean, at that time it was, the trust fund was funded until 2032, incidentally. Now it's like 2034.
Social Security is one of the great achievements of American civilization. I mean, that is
when you say that you're going to fix it, you're conceding it's broken, and now all of a sudden it just becomes a debate as to whose idea is better to fix this broken thing, and that's what you're talking about. Once you concede the reactionary point, you're going to lose out to the really reactionary, revanchist people. When we're talking about that McCarthyism, because, you're talking about cracking down on dissidents. That's my jam. You guys are rookies.
That's a good point. Like, if you really want to repress the Palestinians, he'll do like a much better job than Biden will. Like,
he's out there saying that Chuck Schumer, who has publicly stated, my job is to make sure the left continues to support Israel. Trump's out there going, like, as far as I'm concerned, you're a Palestinian.
Yeah, you're not a real.
I mean,
unfortunately, that's another case where Chuck Schumer has failed.
Oh my God, miserably.
And actually, I mean, the other place we're going to see this actually is China, because a lot of Democrats are doing China saber rattling, and that just thinking that's like kind of smart politics. And that's just gonna
you're just opening the door.
Everything we're saying, you can sum up very simply: you give them an inch, and they'll take a mile.
Right. And that's the politics. I mean, that's just sort of like a truism when you're talking about politics. And then the question is, like, how do you introduce sort of like mini narratives? How do you fiddle around like policy situations? Like use Social Security as an example. Okay, how do we fund it past 2032 when we're having this argument 20 years ago? Well, the answer is get rid of the cap. And you don't talk about Social Security being broken at all. You don't ever say those words. It's the same way with the tariffs too, on some level, I think, because, saying that tariffs are good in this circumstance, they can be good, but it's like saying, like, what he's doing is not using tariffs in the way that they're meant. They're just a tax in this instance. Yeah. Well, so with all that sort of said, talk a little bit about abundance. Like what is that? Explain to people, because we had a thing where, we've been we had Paul Glastis on to go through the sort of like the specifics of what is laid out in abundance, and not so much the overall sort of complaint. And we've done a couple of comments on it, just more based on the interviews that those guys have done. And I'm curious of your take on it.
Yeah, I mean, like, in theory, like, it sounds great, and I actually think that it's there's an actual thing that one wants liberals, especially in the U.S., but I think elsewhere in the world, to do, which is to be thinking about like building things. Like, I think that the sort of like, if you're putting it forward, like in the early 20th century, you had these big, huge projects like the Hoover Dam, the space program. Let's get back to that. Now, I think the problem, so I think that there's like this sort of analytical aspect of like, thinking of it in terms of like, an emphasis on production rather than just regulation, right? And I think it is absolutely true that there's a type of liberalism that's too focused on like just getting the rules right and the regulations right, and not thinking about like an actual project. So I'm very sympathetic to that. Having said that, like any political project involves alliances and working with people, and it is absolutely the case that like with the abundance thing, like we actually have like these memos from these like libertarian think tanks saying like like abundance is a way that libertarians can ally with the centrists to like like push our agenda in the Democratic Party, and one sees it in the way that some of these abundance center left or liberal people like Ezra Klein, they seem much more friendly or inclined to make alliances with these libertarians than they do with like the left. So like it to me, like that sends off like sort of like alarm bells. Like like are they taking like a real problem, like how do we build more housing, and then using it as a stalking horse for just as the way that like the Russiagate stuff had some legitimacy, was a stalking horse for the people like the Cheneys to become legitimate again. I think abundance is really a stalking horse for the Koch brothers and others to gain a foothold in the Democratic Party. And I think on that level, the political level, like one has to take it seriously. And when you raise these issues, they always say, oh, you're not talking about the policies. Well, I'm sorry, but these policies aren't coming out of nowhere. There's a reason why everyone's talking about abundance, is because like these billionaires are putting a huge amount of money into these think tanks to promote it. All these guys have agents. Like there's actually an actual political project going on, and we have to address that.
This is what I'm getting at in terms of like this dynamic, because it is one thing to say we need to get to a place where we are producing more and building like we used to build. Yeah. And the question is like, who's the we in that instance? That's very important. We as a society, and the question is within that, like who's doing the building, who's deciding what we build in those instances is really important. But the other is that you cannot, in our society, maybe there was a time this was the case. I don't know. I don't think so. A policy exists within the context of our politics.
Yes.
And that there is no set of policies that, frankly, you or I are going to read about, unless it's like, like we've had people come on this show who, they're in I don't know what press it would be that their books came out, and maybe one or two people have reviewed it in like other sort of obscure, and they have policies and they're doing this and they're creating policy ideas. But that book wasn't just a series of policies. That was part of a political project. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the thing, is that it's not that whole thing there has implications beyond the narrow sort of
policy prescriptions, which are and they're kind of playing dumb a little bit about that overall effort to make it a political project, which is sketchy to me.
No, I mean, I think that's a very dubious aspect. I mean, on the more broader issue, like I actually think economic growth has kind of been a problem going back to the early 70s. Like the capitalism has not been as productive as it has been, and a lot of these solutions that are being offered have actually already been tried. Like deregulation was tried, and it juiced up things to a certain degree, but then everything goes back to the mean. And so I don't, I mean, I think it's good that we're talking about this. I think this is a core fundamental issue. And, like what I always tell them is like, well, you want to look at an abundance agenda, who's doing it well is Chairman Xi, because they're building like crazy amounts of like high-speed rail and electric cars. And, like, if, maybe we should take some lessons from that.
That could very well be. We'll be there. But that's. Well, I'm waiting for that book.
We gotta look at all the models. We have the Koch brother model, which we've tried that a little bit. There are other models for this problem of like actual productive growth. And in some ways, I mean, I think the productivity argument is actually a good way to go after Trump, because like a lot of this stuff of cutting science funding is absolutely bad for that.
It's all extractive.
Yeah, it's all extractive. You actually need like a sort of
hostile takeover stuff. This is like is literally like what Bain Capital does, right? They come in, they buy the country, they start selling off everything they can, they over leverage it, they extract the value out of it, and then walk away.
That's right. Well, I mean that's the model, and so I think like offering an alternative model, but I think any sort of alternative model has to be much more state-centered, frankly. I don't think that a lot of the problems that we're facing, especially with climate, there's capitalism has kind of already proven that it cannot deal with these problems.
Absolutely.
For the simple reason that like the technologies that we have will they'll break even, but they will not make the profits that fossil fuel will. So
what Trump is doing right now is also an example of just of capitalism, failing. Just the half-hearted, the tariffs obviously are imposed by the U.S. government, but just having tariffs will do nothing to build an industrial base. It will not at all, and it just simply won't. I mean, it might help the existing.
I'm a bit Biden on this one. I think some of this Biden stuff of Build Back Better was getting towards where we need to be.
Yep.
It's just that he screwed up everything else so badly, and he was not capable of selling this. But I mean, if you want an abundance agenda, the other aspect I'll mention is the abundance agenda in terms of the politics. It really is designed to counteract the Bernie framing of the enemy, to say that we have an oligarchy. These are the people who are standing in the way of an abundance agenda. The oligarchs want all the money for themselves, so they're not willing to do the social investments we need to make a world of human flourishing and abundance. And that's like Bernie's argument. And I think a lot of the people like Ezra Klein are trying to preempt that and have a feel-good story where everything is better, but not quite explain where this is going to be coming from.
Yeah, I agree. Jeet Heer, always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks, Jeet.
National Affairs correspondent. We will link to your articles and, of course, to your podcast, Time of Monsters.
Thank you.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.